Welcome to AmeenAcademy.com. Let us do Indian independence movements continuation. The Pune Pact, Ambedkar, and the movement against untouchability. The Pune Pact, signed on September 24, 1932, was a significant agreement between Hindu leaders and Dalit representatives, granting new rights to Dalits. Hindu caste group had labeled untouchables. This agreement arose from the British government's communal award, which proposed separate electorates for Dalits to ensure their political representation. Bhimrao Ramji Ambedkar, the most prominent Dalit leader, supported the proposal, believing that it would allow Dalits to advance their interests. However, Mahatma Gandhi opposed separate electorates, fearing that it would divide the Hindu community and weaken India's quest for independence. While imprisoned, Gandhi began a fast unto death on September 18, 1932 to protest the separate electorates. Faced with Gandhi's deteriorating health, Ambedkar and Hindu leaders negotiated the Pune Pact, which increased Dalit representation with the Hindu electorate instead of creating separate electorates. Ambedkar's advocacy of Dalit rights was rooted in his personal experiences of discrimination and his extensive education. Born on April 14, 1891, into a Dalit Mahar family, Ambedkar faced a severe social exclusion from an early age. Nonetheless, that he excelled academically to the extent that he came to the attention of Sayajirao Gaikwad III, the Maharaja of Baroda, now Vadodara. Then the Maharaja provided financial support for Ambedkar's education at Bombay's Elphinstone College and later a Columbia University in the United States and the London School of Economics in Britain. Ambedkar would use this education to champion the cause of Dalit rights upon his return to India. Ambedkar would also later become the chairman of the drafting committee of the Constitution for the future Republic of India. Although the Pune Pact was significant development in the movement against untouchability, Ambedkar felt coerced into the agreement by Gandhi's threat of suicide by starvation. Nonetheless, Ambedkar's work would continue. He would found several journals for Dalits and through his later role in drafting the Indian Constitution, secure special representation for them in legislative councils. His efforts laid the foundation for future advancement in social justice and the eventual outlawing of untouchability, although cultural caste prejudice continued to persist in India. Provincial election of 1937. Following the Government of India Act 1935, which granted significant autonomy to the provinces of India in response to increasing momentum in the struggle against British rule, elections were held during the winter of 1936 to 37 and results were declared in February 1937. The Indian National Congress emerged victorious in 7 provinces, demonstrating its popularity with the Indian populace. This allowed the Congress party to form a provincial government, giving Indian significant control over local governance for the first time in over a century. The Muslim League, however, was unable to establish a government in any province, even the Muslim majority provinces of Punjab and Bengal. The Congress party ministers resigned only a few years later in 1939 in protest against the India being declared a belligerent nation in World War II without consultation. World War II begins. With the outbreak of World War II in 1939, the Indian independence movement entered its last crucial phase. The Viceroy of India, Victor Alexander John Hope, commonly known as the Lord Lindlow, declared that India was at war with Germany to the dismay of the Congress Party, which had not been consulted. Throughout the war, Indian soldiers would fought for Britain in Asia, Africa, and Europe. The Indian National Congress, under the leadership of figures like Mahatma Gandhi and Jawaharlal Nehru, grappled with how to respond to the war. Gandhi, a staunch anti-fascist, was fundamentally opposed to all forms of the violence, including war. However, he was equally critical of British colonialism. Initially, the Congress Party was willing to support the British war effort provided the Britain assured India of eventual self-governance. However, the British did not agree to this condition, leading the Congress Party to distance itself from Britain as the war progressed. In contrast, the Muslim League fully supported the war effort. Lahore Resolution and the idea of Pakistan. In March 1940, the Muslim League fully resolved to chart its own path. In Punjab, ancient capital of Lahore, the League called for the creation of a separate state for Muslims under the leadership of Muhammad Ali Jinnah. The famous Lahore Resolution, later known as the Pakistan Resolution, was passed by the largest gathering of League delegates just one day after Jinnah informed his followers that a problem of India is not an intercommunal but manifestly of an international character. The League resolved, therefore, that any future constitutional plan proposed by the British for India would not be acceptable to the Muslims unless it was so designed that the Muslim majority areas of India's northwestern and eastern zones were grouped to constitute independent states in which the constituent units shall be autonomous of and sovereign. Although the term Pakistan was not mentioned in the resolution itself, it was popularized by the Hindu press in their coverage shortly after the resolution was passed, and the term was then widely adopted by Muslims. Jinnah later clarified that the resolution envisioned the establishment of not two separately administered Muslim countries, but rather a single Muslim nation state, namely Pakistan. The Quit India movement. On July 14th, 1942, the Congress Party passed its Quit India resolution calling for an immediate end to British rule in India. The involvement of India in the war outraged many Indian political leaders who, despite a range of opinions on the just nature of the war, though it was morally wrong for the Britain to force their subjects into the fighting without consulting Indian leadership and to use Indian resources for the effort. By the war end, 2.5 million Indians had served in the British armed forces, who the majority were volunteers. As the war continued and Japanese armies swept through Britain's Southwest Asian colonies, Singapore, Malaysia, and Burma, a faction of the Congress Party began to call for India to gain immediate independence from Britain in order to avoid Japanese invasion. Japanese forces moved into the Bay of Bengal, attacked a British ship, and bombed the east coast ports of Visakhapatnam and Kakinada, thus making the threat of full scale war for Indian soil seem imminent. Gandhi became more adamant about the departure of the British colonists and less concerned about internal squabbles among Indian leadership. He notably demanded of the British in his magazine Harijan on May 24, 1942, leave India to God. If that is too much, leave her to anarchy. The Congress Party's resolution authorized Gandhi to lead a mass non-violent protest movement if independence was not granted. The slogan "Quit India" was coined by the mayor of Bombay, Yusuf Mehrallah. When the British government failed to meet its demands, the Congress Party met in Bombay and voted against aid to initiate the Quit India movement. During that meeting, Gandhi delivered his "Do or Die" speech, in which famously declared the mantra is "Do or die." We shall either free India or die in the attempt. We shall not live to see the perpetuation of our slavery. The morning after Quit India resolution was agreed upon in Bombay, British authorities invoked the Defence of India Act, which permitted detention without a trial, to arrest Gandhi and dozens of other leaders of the Congress Party, including Jawaharlal Nehru, Abdul Kalam Azad, and Vallabhbhai Patel. Concerning for Gandhi's age and fear of worldwide condemnation persuaded the British not to jail Gandhi, and instead they confined him in the Aga Khan Summer Palace in Pune along with his wife Kasturiba, his secretary, and some followers. The British authorities erroneously hoped they could stifle the government movement by imprisoning its leaders. The British authorities were, however, misguided. With the leaders of the Congress Party in jail, younger, more militant forces turned to the movement in a more incidentary direction. The British government, particularly Secretary of State Leopold Amery, in a radio address, further fanned the flames of justifying the arrest of the Congress Party leaders as a means of preventing mass violence. Amery's description of the movement's disruptive tactics might have inadvertently given voice and legitimacy to this very action among more militant protesters. Also, partly due to the lack of Congress Party leaders emphasizing nonviolence, many demonstrations turned into attacks on the British themselves, the part of the British Raj is infrastructure. Telegraph lines and railroads were destroyed, and hundreds of railway stations, post office, and police stations were burned down or damaged. The British response to these protests was often brutal. The military, already present in India in larger than usual numbers for the war effort, was deployed to disperse rioters, and in a few cases, airplanes were instructed to fire their machine guns on the crowd from the air. Parts of the United Provinces, Bihar, the northwest frontier, and Bengal state were bombed and starved by pilots as the British Raj resolved to crush all Indian resistance as swiftly as follows. Thousands of people were killed or wounded, and roughly 60,000 arrests were made in the first few months. Most of those arrested, along with the leaders of the Congress Party, were imprisoned for the duration of World War II to prevent further protests. Although Gandhi was released on May 6, 1944, became because of his failing health. Although the movement failed to achieve its stated aim of gaining India's immediate independence from British rule, its impact was profound. The Quit India movement demonstrated the willingness of ordinary Indians to take action to advance their independence and prove to the British government the necessity of decolonization after World War II. Next, Subhash Chandra Bose and his Indian National Army. Running parallel to the activities of Gandhi, Nehru, and the other nationalist leaders was the career of Subhash Chandra Bose, an individual with a biography worthy of Shakespearean tragedy. Commonly known as Nethaji, a respected leader, he was at times an ally and at other times an adversary of Gandhi, dedicated to the independence movement from a young age. He advocated for broad industrialization in contrast with Gandhi's preference for cottage industries and favored a militant approach to the independence struggle as opposed to Gandhi's assistance to nonviolence. During World War II, both sought alliances with Germany and Japan. Desperate for military support, he believed that they could aid India in driving the British out. In 1943, with Japanese aid and assistance, he proclaimed the establishment of provisional independent Indian government and formed a trained army of about 40,000 troops in Japanese occupied Southwest Asia, which he called the Indian National Army, Azad Hind Fauj. Alongside Japanese troops, his forces advanced to Rangoon and thence overland into India, reaching Indian soil on March 18, 1944, and moving into Kohima and the plains of Imphal. In a stubborn battle, the mixed Indian and Japanese forces lacking Japanese air support were defeated and forced to retreat. The Indian National Army, nevertheless, for some time succeeded in maintaining its identity as a liberation army based in Burma and later broader Southeast Asia. With the defeat of Japan, however, both fortunes ended. A few days after Japan's announced surrender in August 1945, both fleeing Southeast Asia reportedly died in a Japanese hospital in Taiwan as a result of burn injuries from the plane crash. World War II ends. By the end of World War II, Britain was greatly diminished under immense international pressure to decolonize and following the Quiet India movement, increasingly recognizing the necessity of withdrawal from India. In the 1945 United Kingdom general elections, Churchill's Conservative Party government was voted out of power and the new Labour Party Prime Minister Clement Attlee appointed one of Gandhi's old admirers, Lord Frederick William Pethick Lawrence, as Secretary of State for India and Burma, with the dawn of the atomic gauge in August and Japan's surrender. London's primary concern in India has how to find the political solution to the Hindu-Muslim conflict that would most expeditiously permit the British Raj to withdraw its forces and to extricate as many as its assets as possible from what seemed to the Labour Party to have become more of an imperial burden and liability than any real advantage for Great Britain. In 1946, Cabinet Mission. In 1946, Pethick Lawrence personally led a three-man cabinet deputation to New Delhi with the hope of resolving the Congress Party Muslim League deadlock and thus transferring British power to a single Indian administration. Richard Stafford Cripps was responsible primarily for drafting the ingenious cabinet mission plan, which proposed a three-tier federation for India integrated by a minimal central union government in New Delhi, which would be limited to handling foreign affairs, communications, defense, and only those finances required to care for such union-wide matters. The subcontinent was to be divided into three major groups of provinces. Group A to include the Hindu majority provinces of the Bombay Presidency, Madras, now Chennai, the United Provinces, now in Uttar Pradesh, Bihar, Orissa, and the central provinces, virtually all of what became the independent India a year later. In Group B contained the Muslim majority provinces of Punjab, Sindh, the northwest frontier, the Balochistan, the areas of which the western part of the Pakistan was created, and Group C to include the Muslim majority Bengal, the partition of which becomes the eastern part of the Pakistan, and in 1971 the country's Bangladesh, and the Hindu majority Assam. The group governments were to be virtually autonomous in everything but matters reserved to the Union Center, and within each group of princely states were to be integrated into their neighboring provinces. Local provincial governments were to have the choice of opting out of the group in which they found themselves should a majority of their populace vote to do so. The Punjab's large and powerful Sikh population would have been placed in a particularly difficult and anomalous position. For Punjab as a whole would have belonged to Group B, and much of Sikh community had become anti-Muslim since the start of the Mughal emperor's persecution of their group in 17th century. Sikhs played so important a role in British India Army that many of their leaders hoped that the British would reward them at the war's end with special assistance in carving out their own country from the rich heart of the Punjab's fertile canal colony lands. There were in the kingdom once ruled by Ranjit Singh. Most Sikhs lived. Since World War I, Sikhs had been equally fierce in opposing the British Raj, and though never more than 2% of India's population, they had as highly disproportionate a number of nationalist martyrs as of many army officers. A Sikh Akali Dal, party of immortals, which was started in 1920, led militant marches to liberate Gurdwara, doorway to the Guru, the Sikh places of worship, from corrupt Hindu managers. The Tara Singh, the most important leader of the vigorous Sikh political movement, first raised the demand for a separate Azad Punjab in 1942. By March 1946, many of Sikh demanded a Sikh nation state alternately called Sikhistan or Khalistan, land of the Sikhs or land of the pure. The cabinet mission, however, had no time for or energy to focus on Sikh separatist demands and found the Muslim League's demand for Pakistan equally impossible to accept. Direct Action Day. As a pragmatist Jinnah, terminally afflicted with the tuberculosis and lung cancer, accepted the cabinet mission's proposals as did Congress party leaders. The early summer of 1946 therefore saw a dawn of hope for India's future prospects, but that soon proved false when Nehru announced at his first news conference as the re-elected president of the Congress party that no constituent assembly could be bound by any pre-arrangement's constitutional formula. Jinnah read Nehru's remarks as a complete repudiation of the plan, which had to be accepted in its entirety in order to work. Jinnah then convened the League's working committee, which withdrew its previous agreement to the Federation scheme and declared August 16, 1946 to be Direct Action Day, a day of nationwide protest by the Muslim nations. Thus began India's bloodiest year of civil war since the mutiny nearly a century earlier. The Hindu Muslim rioting and killing that started in Calcutta sent deadly sparks of fury, frenzy, and fear to every corner of the subcontinent as all civilized restraint seemed to disappear. Lord Mountbatten's arrival. Lord Louis Mountbatten, served March-August 1947, was sent to replace Archibald Percival Wavell as a viceroy as Britain prepared to transfer its power over India to some responsible hands by no later than June 1948. Shortly after reaching Delhi, where he conferred with the leaders of all parties and with his own officials, Mountbatten decided that the situation was too dangerous to wait even that brief period, fearing a forced evacuation of British troops still stationed in India. Mountbatten resolved to opt for partitions, one that would divide Punjab and Bengal, rather than risk further political negotiations while civil war raged and a new mutiny of India troops seemed imminent. Among the major Indian leaders, Gandhi alone refused to reconcile himself to partition and urged Mountbatten to offer Jinnah the premiership of a united India rather than a separate Muslim nation. Nehru, however, would not agree to that, nor would his most powerful Congress party deputy Vallabhbhai Patel, as both had become tired of arguing with Jinnah and were eager to get on with the job of running an independent government of India. The Indian Independent Act. British Parliament passed in July 1947 Indian Independent Act. It ordered that the dominions of India and Pakistan be demarcated by midnight of August 14 to 15, 1947, now celebrated annually as Independence Day in both Pakistan, August 14, and India, August 15. It was both a glorious and tragic moment. The people of the subcontinent, though deeply divided, were now free and the masters of their own destinies. Just before midnight, Nehru made his famous Tryst with Destiny speech to the Indian Constituent Assembly in the Parliament House. The partition of India and Pakistan. The Indian Independent Act ordered that the assets of the world's largest empire, which had been integrated in countless ways for more than a century, be divided within a single month. Raising the deadline, the Boundary Commission, appointed by Mountbatten, worked desperately to partition Punjab and Bengal in such a way as to leave the maximum practical members of Muslims to the west of the former's new boundary and to the east of the latest. The commissions consisted of four members from the Congress party and four from the Muslim League and was chaired by Kirill Rancliffe, a lawyer who had never before been to India. With little agreement between the parties and deadlines looming, Radcliffe made the final determination of the borders, which satisfied no one and infuriated everyone. Dividing Punjab and Bengal, the provinces with the slim Muslim majority, caused tremendous problems as the demographic distribution of those regions were the heterogeneous and diverse. The new borders ran through the middle of villages, town, field, and more. When Pakistan was created, East and West Pakistan were separated by about 100 miles. The commission also effectively cut in half the large Sikh population in Punjab. The western half of the community reacted with great concern over potential Muslim rule. The Mughal emperors had persecuted the Sikh gurus in the 17th century, and the legacy of that persecution remained deeply felt. Although the commission had placed Amritsar, the sixth most sacred city, under Indian dominion, many other important Sikh shrines and landed estates were set to become part of the Pakistan. Some Sikhs of western Punjab tried initially to retain control over their estates by pushing out the local Muslims, but their attempts were met with violent reprisals. Nearly the entirety of the Sikh community ultimately fled to areas that would become part of India. The transfer power was completed on August 14 in Pakistan and August 15 in India, held a day apart so that Mountbatten could attend both ceremonies. With the birth of the two independent countries, the British Raj formally came to an end on August 15, 1947. The borders of new countries were not published until 17, 2 days after the end of British rule. This set the stage for an immediate escalation of communal violence in areas around the new borders. Many people did not understand what partition meant until they were in the middle of it, sometimes literally. If a border village was roughly evenly divided between Hindus and Muslims, one community could argue that the village rightly belonged to India or Pakistan by driving out or killing members of the other community. The assassination of Mahatma Gandhi and aftermath. Amid growing communal violence, Gandhi traveled to New Delhi, India's capital, to take part in a fast for peace and to participate in prayer meetings. His presence on the day of his death, January 30, 1948, attracted a crowd of followers estimated at between several hundreds and thousands people about 5:15 p.m. Gandhi and his two granddaughters left Birla House, where he had been living, with the intent of leading his followers to a nearby summer pagoda where he often made his evening devotions. Nathuram Godse approached the frail politicians, greeted him, then fired three shots at close range from a small caliber revolver that he had hidden in his clasped hands, striking Gandhi in the upper thigh, abdomen, and chest. As Gandhi fell to the ground, he put his hand on his forehead in the Hindu gesture of forgiveness. He was quickly carried back into Birla House and placed on a couch, his head resting in the lap of his granddaughter's Mani, who minutes later told the crowd, Bapu is finished. His final words were allegedly, Haram, Haram, oh God. Now, news of Gandhi's death spread quickly throughout India, generating a sometimes violent response. In Bombay, riots set fundamentalist Hindus against terrified Muslims. In New Delhi, throngs of people left their homes and businesses to mourn at Birla House. Troops were sent to maintain order. A few hours after Gandhi's death, a balcony window at Birla House was opened and Gandhi's body was carried outside and placed in a chair facing the crowd. Prime Minister Jawaharlal Nehru gave a radio address later in the evening in which he proclaimed a day of national mourning and appealed for calm. At the end of his speech, Nehru informed listeners that Gandhi's body would be brought out at 11:30 a.m. the following day and taken to the banks of the Yamuna River, tributary of Ganges, and creamed there at 4 p.m. The Dominion of India was reborn on January 26, 1950 as a sovereign democratic republic and a union of states. That day is celebrated annually as Republic Day, a national holiday commemorating the adoption of India's constitution on January 26, 1950. The constitution was crafted under the chairmanship of Bhimrao Ramji Ambedkar and resolved to secure for its citizens liberty, equality, and fraternity. So far, we discussed about India's freedom fight. We have done. Please subscribe our YouTube channel.